Hi, my name is Danny, and I'm just going to quickly tell you a bit of my story. So I was raised in a place called Lowestoft. It's my hometown, and I was raised with my mum, my dad, and my sister. And on the outside, we had a nice home. It had 2 cars, everything looked good. But there was always an underlying issue with my dad's alcoholism. He was an alcoholic and would be continually drinking. If he was working, I wouldn't see him, or he'd be at the pub and I wouldn't see him, or because he worked night shifts, he'd be asleep during the day. So I barely had any relationship with my dad, and the little time I really spent with him was that most of the time he was drinking or was drunk, and that would result in arguments. I'd be a young boy in my bedroom, and I'd be able to hear my dad swearing at my mum, throwing things, glasses being smashed, all kinds of mayhem would go on downstairs, and that was the environment that me and my sister were raised in. And this went on for many, many years. The dad wasn't really there, and the anger was always there with his alcoholism. And when I was around 12 years old, my parents got divorced. It was a very difficult divorce. It wasn't an easy, clean break, if there ever is one. And he would be continually trying to push his way into the house. He'd turn up on the doorstep, all different kind of things, causing more arguments. And all of this emotional upheaval was affecting me in a great way on the inside. And so, because you don't know how to process life when you're that age. And very quickly I was diagnosed with depression, and my mood was constantly low. We ended up moving into this rougher state. I was so angry about it, so frustrated, didn't know what to do. And my mental health was being hugely affected during this time, and the lack of having a father figure in my life really played into that mental health problems that I began to develop. And when I was 14 years old, I was diagnosed not just with depression but with psychosis. And what happened was that someone made a bit of a joke that a singer from a band called Muse, the lead singer Matt Bellamy, that somehow he was my dad. And they said it as a joke, but in the emotional mess that was going on, I began to believe it. And I became fully convinced that this man who I've never met was actually my dad. And I think it was the fatal cocktail of rejection and emotional upheaval all working together that was creating this mess in my mind. And I began to develop OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, that was fueling my psychotic thoughts and this belief this man was my dad and I had nothing to do with him. And it would take me sometimes an hour to go up the stairs. I'd be putting my feet in all these different ways. I had a real issue with reflection. I would talk to myself. A typical evening for me at one point would be an hour to get up the stairs. I would talk to my reflection in the mirror for half an hour. I'd go into my bedroom. I would talk to a rug on the floor, because another word for a rug is a mat, and the person I was trying to talk to was Matt Bellamy. I would talk to a calendar of him, and then I would lay on my bed perfectly straight and almost talk to him. And this would take hours and hours, and if I did any part of it wrong, I had to start the whole process again. It was a nightmare, and I was so tired from this. I was seeing counselors on a regular basis, psychiatrists. I was on a lot of medication, antidepressants and antipsychotics, and I was taken to one of the top mental health places in the UK. And they did a series of tests on me, and my mind was completely frazzled. At this point, I was basically a mental husk. I was a vegetable. And they did all these tests, and the conclusion they told my parents was that Danny is a mental conundrum. In other words, he's a puzzle, and we don't have an answer to how to resolve this issue. But I carried on with life. I carried on trying to make life work in my own little fantasy world. And then by the time I was 17, I began doing what everybody else was doing. I also started fueling all my mental health issues with smoking drugs, and also alcohol, which all started to pile on the problems that I was already experiencing in my mind, and trouble at home all blew up 3 days after I turned 17. And I was it was by consent, but kind of forced out of the house at the same time. I knew I couldn't stay at home anymore. And so I've just turned 17. I'm now drinking a lot, smoking a lot, taking drugs. I have heavy depression. I was suicidal, and I was heavily psychotic, and there was no change. And now I've disconnected myself from my family and my home. And it was I ended up getting put into a hostel, where someone was going to the Potter's House Church in Norwich at that hostel, and they invited me to church. And never really been invited to church before. I had no upbringing in Christianity, and I didn't really care for what he had to say, so I actually swore at him, and I told him where to go, and I wasn't interested in what he had to offer. But he kept asking whether Jesus could change me and prompting me, and eventually I went to church actually out of boredom. I had nothing else to do that time. I had no real faith, and I went to a service at the Potter's House in Norwich, and I didn't understand what was going on. I felt very out of place, but I felt very welcome at the same time. And whilst the sermon was being preached, it was largely over my head, but at the end, the preacher was given an invitation that Jesus Christ could wipe the slate clean, and that I could have a brand new life and a brand new start. Now, I knew how messed up I was. I knew my addictions that were developing. I was turning into my dad. I knew that my mind was basically a write-off from the professionals, and I was stuck in my own little world. And I remember thinking, I've tried everything to change, everything to fix my depression, everything to change my mindset. And I remember coming to that point where I said, okay, God, if you're even real, I need a miracle in my heart. I need a miracle in my mind. God, if you can do that, I'll believe in you. And that night I answered the call, the invitation to receive Jesus Christ. I repented of my sins. There were many of them. And I received forgiveness from Christ that night. And God began to go to work in my heart. And what began to happen is that I was being set free of all of those addictions that I'd developed. All these things, that much of my desires changed. I didn't want to do smoking. I didn't want to drink anymore. I didn't want to take drugs. But God did an absolute miracle in my mind. And it's hard to even explain how much of a complete miracle it was, and how messed up I was on depression and psychosis and OCD. In just a short period of time, Jesus Christ set me totally free. Today I have no more depression. I have no more psychosis at all. I've been completely delivered from those things. Now remember, that was what medical professionals couldn't do. And I learned firsthand what Jesus could do, and that he could do what professionals can't do. He could fix the brokenhearted, that he can heal the minds of people who've been totally cast aside by society as a write-off. Jesus can do what no one else can do. And I'm not just saying that because I read it in a book. Although the Bible says it, I've experienced it. And I've had a brand new life because of Jesus Christ. And that is what he can do for you as well.